And without further ado, we're going to kick it over to Larry to lead us through the general session portion. If you've got questions along the way, you can drop them in the chat and Larry can hit those. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end and we'll do a full Q&A at the end. So, Larry, you can start sharing your screen now.
Okay, let me see. Is it still being shared or no? Maybe not. Let's see.
There we go. Got it.
Good. Thumbs up.
Good.
Sounds good. Okay. Let me just get this here. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I think this is a very interesting and valuable topic in the digital landscape today. So we're going to talk about how to secure products built on AI, automation, and third-party platforms. I'm sure this will be very useful because a lot of you are probably innovators and founders who are building solutions for enterprise customers. So your product is one of the biggest risks to organizations right now. And in the latest Verizon data breach investigation report, 30% of breaches involved a third party in 2025. That's double, which was 15% in 2024. So as we can see that there's a rising an increase in hackers specifically targeting vendors. So you probably heard about these three companies here, and it was just absolutely necessary to bring this to the light. In 2024, I believe, changed healthcare. There was a nationwide disruption across hospitals, small practices. A lot went out of business because people couldn't bill because of the ransomware attack that Change Healthcare went through. It was critical to the nation, and they are a third party to a lot of health systems in the healthcare ecosystem. CrowdStrike, I'm sure you heard of that. This was another massive global outage. The 16 plus years I've been in the cybersecurity industry, I never knew this company was this big. But airlines were delayed. So a lot of my colleagues were on some of those airlines doing this. A lot of healthcare systems were actually had outages as well, and a lot of other enterprise companies. Just another example of a massive third-party breach that brought down entire ecosystems for a nice period of time. And I put Canva here as well because Canva is a startup and their breach happened in 2019. And obviously, they're still doing very well. But a lot of times, founders think that because they are a startup, they are excluded from hackers and breaches. But this is not the case. In fact, it was reported last year that hackers are targeting investor portfolios because they know investors don't want to lose out on all of their financial investments. So startups are a part of hackers on their radar. So just because you're a startup, don't think you're excluded from being attacked. And 139 million records were impacted. People were impacted due to their breach. So one breach, massive impact. It really tears up ecosystems. What this presentation is all about. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Larry Trotter. I'm the founder of Inherent Security, and I'm so much more than cybersecurity, although I love it. At Inherent Security, we protect the future growth of growth stage health tech companies, which are usually 10 to 30 employees, without slowing them down. And I'm currently overcoming a few things, notably perfectionism, impatience, and a marketing funnel that has swallowed everything but my soul. So first, we have to start off on how the traditional infrastructure was. So initially, there were on-premise networks. Companies were built, had their own data centers on-prem with servers, that sort of thing. And they were also giving out corporate devices, laptops, mobile phones. There wasn't a lot of personal use. And due to that behavior, the user behavior was predictable because they had more control over it. And there were also a lot of less of limited external dependencies. There weren't a lot of SaaS solutions. Companies weren't using the cloud, that sort of thing. So this is pretty much what the traditional infrastructure was. Fast forward to modern today, how modern products live. We have personal devices, there's cloud platforms, there's APIs and integrations, there's automated workflows, and there's generative AI and agentic systems. These products, some which are which you are developing, are ecosystems. And something I left out up here is IoT as well, and probably a few other, but these products are making up the ecosystems. So, how ecosystems change products, right? So, when we think about all of those devices, personal devices, cloud hosting, APIs, et cetera, that expands the attack surface because you have devices in a wide range of different places. So it essentially increases that attack surface and it expands, and your dependencies multiply because AI, APIs, cloud, it really makes building a lot more efficient and faster today. But with that, it does introduce a lot of risk because as third parties, you are depending on other third parties to help propel your product essentially, and your visibility does decrease. When you're a startup, this can be very expensive to try to monitor these types of devices in different areas, so it can be costly. And due to that, when you're a startup, you usually can't afford to spend that type of money on software. In return, your visibility will decrease. And it's what this really all leads down to is trust. And that's what your customers want to do. They want to essentially be able to trust your product when they adopt it, whether you're B2B or whether you're B2C. And I always try to use the analogy as like when you go to get your car done from an automobile, you want to trust that person as well. So think about it in that terms when it comes to security. So how scaling amplifies mistakes. AI and automation, agentic AI is really hot right now. It acts quickly, it can operate at scale, but agentic AI specifically, it depends on sweeping permissions, and I really want to hone in on that. So some of the risks we have here are over permissive integrations, AI acting on unverified data, automated workflows unmonitored, and model hallucination. But I really want to talk about agentic AI because it's really at the forefront right now. It's going to make things a lot better. It's a great technology, but with that it comes a lot of risk because we're talking about systems now that are acting on our behalf, even though they are our instructions, they're acting autonomously on our behalves. And if you're not monitoring that, there's a lot of critical risk that can come along with that. So understanding those considerations when you're using agentic AI or even generative AI should be at the forefront of your mind. So how security is the sum of your dependencies. So we have cloud infrastructure, we have payment processes, authentication platforms, data services, AI vendors, analytic tools, messaging platforms. All of these different vendors make up your entire ecosystem, and it really helps you build and be innovative in your solutions today and cost efficient. And as we see here in the middle of this bullseye, if you will, is your core product that depends on all of these. So there's a risk associated with each one of these different types of vendors, messaging platforms, for instance. If you're in a highly regulated market, even though you're using a messaging platform, let's use healthcare as an example. And depending on the type of data that you're sharing in that platform, the platform has to be HIPAA compliant if you're talking about the healthcare industry. So it's not just selecting any messaging platform and using that service. You have to be really specific about it when you're using these different type of vendors, and that can go across analytical tools and AI vendors, of course. And something about analytical tools. About 3 months ago, OpenAI experienced notified their users of a breach because an analytical vendor that they were using were hacked, and in turn OpenAI had to notify everyone, that sort of thing. And even if you aren't affected directly, just having to notify your customers because one of your vendors was breached, is something you really don't want to do. And AI vendors, something else that's really big right now is the whole Anthropic, OpenAI working with the DoD. Anthropic didn't want to work with the DoD because they wanted to use their information for surveillance. They turned it down, lost a bunch of contracts. The FDA was a great example. About 2 days earlier this week, the FDA, their contract with Anthropic, they released that contract, but their AI depended solely on Anthropic. So now they're kind of scrambling, trying to figure out what they're going to do because in the medical device industry, a lot of third parties are bolting on AI. So this was a huge problem. And this is just another example of the dependency on these vendors and how it can be critical from a security standpoint. So how security fails in growth stage companies. This is what I usually see happen from experience. It really starts off with architecture and product design. Security is really considered after the launch rather than actually doing the architecture. I can tell you, I've been in countless daily stand-ups with development teams and just, a fly on the wall, if you will, on those calls, and security never comes up. So what you often see is we're building architecture and then we find out later down the road that it's missing a security feature or there's a vulnerability because it wasn't embedded in the design. You think you're moving fast without security, but you have to double back because a feature or something isn't secure with the product, which increases your time to ship, you're missing deadlines, that sort of thing. So it really starts with product design and integration. That's what we've really been honing in. You are integrating into your customer systems and you have vendors that integrate into your system. So third party risk, again, we saw that it doubled from last year. Breaches caused because of third party risk. We really need to do our due diligence in terms of integrations and scaling. You start off, a lot of founders start off with 2 to 3 people. So everyone has admin privileges when they're building. And this it's fine because it's low risk in the beginning, but as you scale, you never really double back and fix that. So you keep functioning with that same model in mind, giving everybody access over privileged access, and it gets you in a lot of trouble. So what you really need to do as you grow, when you start to get into 10, 20, 30 people, you need to really go back and look at those, review those permissions and see who really needs admin permissions and who doesn't, and include services with that too, and really scale those back. This is how security supports innovation. It reduces friction during enterprise sales. Can I skip a slide here? I did skip a slide. Okay, let's go back. I thought something was missing. Okay, so this is how security shows up as business problems. You have a great marketing team, you get some leads in, you qualify those leads, everything makes sense. You have a phone call. It works for your customer, it works for you. You write a proposal, you kind of go into that negotiation phase. Once you get through that, you think you're going to close the deal, but that's when the security team comes in procurement, and you see that brown rectangle I have there, which is your security review. So what startups usually think the expectation is security problems look like a breach, but in reality, security problems are bottlenecks. They can slow down enterprise deals if you aren't confident in your responses to their security concerns. You will receive security questionnaires during procurement. If you haven't started receiving those now, you will start to see them as you scale. I can give you a few examples on my clients. I've been hired just to focus on their security questionnaires because that's how many are coming in when they're starting to scale. And it really is a problem, and it really can set you back if you don't have things lined up. Integration concerns from partners. When you integrate into your partners, they're going to want to make sure you're secure so you don't bring down their systems or mess up their reputation. And investor diligence questions. I've seen this with some of my clients where their investors will ask, what is your cybersecurity program look like? And we have to develop a package to show to them that we're doing we have the necessary security requirements in place, so they feel confident in their portfolio and their investments. So this is how, going back to how security supports innovation. It reduces friction during your enterprise's sales. Again, it just all goes back to trust. When your customers adopt your product, they just, at the end of the day, really want to be able to trust it and know that they're safe, their customers and their customers' data is safe. So it really does reduce friction. It increases your partner's confidence. Again, when you integrate into whoever you partner with, it increases their confidence when they know that you're secure. It prevents operational disruptions. We've seen that in the 3 breach examples that I showed at the very beginning. So a lot of companies don't even survive operational disruptions. It's very costly, time and money. So this is another area where cybersecurity really supports that. It builds long-term user trust, whether it's your customers, whether it's your B2C and there's actually users who's using your platform. It really just builds that trust. And another example I like to use is today, privacy is really big when we go to purchase products or software. We really want to understand in today's world what is being done with our data. Think about it from that lens, but a security perspective. And you want to build that type of user trust with your customers, or if it's consumers that you're dealing with. This is how founders should focus. They should focus on product security design. That means having someone who owns security and is sitting in those meetings with you and actually providing their expertise and their advice as you build to make sure that you do confidently and securely. Supply chain risk management. I mean, this whole presentation has been about the supply chain. We really want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with our supply chain, whether that's sending them questionnaires, whether that's collecting the SOC 2 report, and depending on, whatever your risk tolerance is, you want to dig a little deeper to make sure that they're just not checking boxes when you do send them a questionnaire. I always say trust but verify. You probably want to go in and really request some of that evidence and verify their answers to make sure that they're secure. And your access controls and security awareness. We talked about this, when you start off building, everyone has a high level of permissions, but we want to scale that back as you start to grow. And also security awareness training, because ransomware, which comes predominantly through phishing, is still number one in terms of breaches. So we want to make sure that we're providing the correct training to our workforce. But we also want to make sure that they're actually paying attention to the training and that it's effective. I have a story at an organization I used to work for. One user used to consistently fail training on purpose because they thought it was funny. But you really have to look through the lens of what you've invested in your solution and what your investors have invested. So you want to make sure everybody takes that seriously. And one way you do this is enforcing it through sanctions. Sanctions are very, very important. Everything I just talked about, cybersecurity in general, is nothing but words on paper if it's not enforced. So really, if you take away anything, really remember that it has to be enforceable. And the goal is not perfect protection. If anyone ever tells you bring on a consultant or a company and they tell you that they can 100% guarantee that you are secure, run away fast as you can, because couldn't be farthest from the truth. We just want to really lower risk when it comes to our products and the solutions, or even our services. And we want to instill trust in our users, our customers, our partners, and our investors. If you do have a startup, whether it's a service or a product right now, you are in the perfect position, because it's easier to build trust in your technology from the beginning than doing it when you're this $150 million company. I've worked for big Fortune 500 companies, and it's not as easy as you think, just because they have time, money, and resources. It's a lot more complex when you're already established to embed cybersecurity, because it's essentially a culture shift. So you're at the very best stage when you're starting from the beginning and embedding it from the foundation, from the ground up. So don't do it after you scale. Don't do it after a breach. A lot of companies won't even survive a breach, but do it from the very beginning. And now open up the room for questions.
That was so awesome, Larry. That was really good. I think that there's a question in here that I'd love to have you start with from Janet. Is there like a minimum security setup everyone should have from day one?
That kind of goes back. Just trying to change my screen here. It kind of goes back to the very beginning. Having it embedded, and you hear this policies and procedures all the time. I would say definitely start off with the policies and procedures, because you want to set the expectations. That really set the expectations for your company, where it's used as a checkbox item versus actually being effective is when you just use canned policies that can be used across any company, but you're really not customizing that to your organization. And then, like I said, if you don't enforce it, if you just have policies with words on paper, then they're not going to be very useful. You want to make sure that you enforce it and that your workforce acknowledges that you are enforcing that. And your access permissions, making sure that whatever access you're giving to people is the least amount that they need. So you don't want to give over permissive access. And even if you are a two or three a person company, it really all starts with habit. So if you start from the ground up with those types of habit, you can, it's easier to build that in and keep it consistently as your company grows.
Awesome. There was another question. So Kim had to go, but this will be in the recording. Asking about security issues with OpenClaw.
Oh, yeah. That's if just in general with open clause, this is the beauty about technology, and what I love about it is it's so accessible to everybody, and it's kind of really easy to build off of it. And that's what OpenClaw essentially is open source for agents, right? But there's a lot of risks that come with that too, because whoever is building that is not necessarily looking from a security perspective, and the flaws in the code. So when you're using anything open source, and it really, I would say, really it depends too on what industry that you're working on, that you want to make sure that security testing is a part of that code, because we've already seen vulnerabilities with because people have just used OpenClaw and that sort of thing without actually testing it. So as far as a safety perspective, treat it as you would when you're building an application nowadays. But when applications first started to boom, we weren't too sure about them. They weren't as secure in the very beginning. So make sure you do your secure code testing, your penetration testing, that sort of thing.
Awesome. And then Lee was asking about regulations. Lee, are you looking for more regulations? Are you looking for the regulators to keep you safe? Lee asked, do you think regulations will catch up with AI fast enough?
Oh, that's it. Will it keep up with AI fast enough? Is that question?
Yeah, and there were already some comments about it. It's already, it'll never, the regulation can never keep up.
Yeah, so regulations do fall behind, and I think that's has a lot to do with politics and who's there. I feel like there's not a lot of technology focused people, but actually with AI, it's actually very interesting. A lot of people don't know this. There's this organization called Chai. I can't remember what it stands for, but AI, I believe. But they did release a report, I want to say the end of last year, fourth quarter of last year, about all the states that actually have bills in place, and they tagged them as either being in place and being processed. Some have actually passed and some have actually failed. And this is all surrounding AI. So I thought that was very interesting when it comes to it. So, I guess because it's moving at such a fast pace and it's so powerful, that we are seeing them keep up with it a lot more than they traditionally have been. And I can especially speak for that within healthcare, because it's just really blowing up in the healthcare space.
So, let's see. Mike asked, with many small shops entering the marketplace, what's the best budget-friendly approach to a new startup for managing security?
Whoa. That's kind of a tough one, when it comes to the whole budget thing. Realistically, if I'm a realist, I get it. When you're first starting off small, I write a lot about how it's often handed off to engineers or development. They get this security responsibility that they never signed up for. I get it. It makes sense in the very beginning, but so I would say if you have to do that, do that. There's some GCR platforms that I know a lot of startups do use as well that are cost friendly. I think that really helps you shape and understand what you need to be looking for. But the thing with the GRC platform is, if you don't have the extra expertise behind it, it's kind of like, okay, I have all the rules or the requirements, but how do we do this stuff, because we're not experts? So you kind of fall into that a basket there. But I really would say, when either go to your when you go to your first round, really start thinking about including budgeting for having someone who's an expert and can speak to this and help you implement this, within your startup.
What other questions do you folks have? I guess, Larry, one question is, when it comes to, I know there's insurance out there, but the insurance, you know, uh, is going to be slow to help remediate things. Um, what are some other practical things that someone could do today? I mean, if they're starting from zero, having the conversation and getting some policies around it is good. What more could someone do today and this week?
Right. So there's a few angles to that, and I do want to speak on insurance too, because there's a lot of misconception when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. I hear often that, oh, we have insurance, so if anything happens, we'll be okay. That couldn't be
Hmm.
farthest from the truth. Think about it, your insurance with your car. If you just get if in any accident, they're just going to pay it outright, or if they're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions. It's the same thing with insurance. They do require you to have certain controls in place, and they will, do their due diligence if something happens to make sure that you have controls in place before they actually say they're going to pay out whatever happens in terms of a breach or et cetera, et cetera. So when you're starting out, I would really just say start off with the basics. And I'm going to share a guide after this with you and your team, especially that you can send to everyone that kind of helps them out starting in the beginning. And it's really just starting on focus with the basics, having your access controls in place, making sure that things are encrypted. And today I would say is more of an advanced control, but very makes a lot of sense no matter what stage you are, is having that business continuity, right? Failover. If something happens, if your primary product goes down, make sure you have a secondary in place so you can fail over, so you have minimal interruption, especially how we like to have things so fast today as consumers. That's really huge. If you're in a regulated industry, what I would say is to essentially really conduct a gap assessment to see where you are, what's required in the industry, and I'm sorry, it's part of regulation, and to see where you currently are, and now you have these gaps to where you can address them to make sure that you're in within compliance. If you're a little bit further ahead and you have a bigger team, you're kind of in that growth stage, I would definitely recommend people to look at SOC 2. How do I really feel about it? It really has been commercialized, made mainstream today. But it's one of those things where your customers want to have some idea of how secure you are, and that's really that all they know. So I think it's a great first step. But I would definitely say don't stop at a SOC 2 compliance audit, because it's almost like checkbox, so it can get you into trouble to thinking that you're really secure if you just stop there. But those would really be my recommendations. Did I answer the question or any follow up?
Yeah, I think that piece of the insurance policy is not going to come in and fix everything.
Oh no, no, and they might not even pay it. So we know how insurance goes.
So I think Marley asks a good question. If someone hired you today coming out of this call, what would kind of the initial process look like? What would some of the conversations be? What, you know, ranges and scope on budget? Where do you start?
So essentially, I would start off with discovery, just learn more about your business, and that helps identify, if there's any regulatory requirements that we need to think about, and get a little bit more information about your infrastructure, business side, et cetera, et cetera. And then usually what I suggest is starting off with the gap assessment, right? Let's see where you currently are and see where we need to get you. So you can have those deltas in front of you and say, okay, this is where we need to go, and this is how we get you there, and we will build out a roadmap to get you there. In terms of budget, that can vary so much. My company, we have we essentially can come in as an extension as your team as a vCISO and help you there on a month-to-month basis. Or we also work on projects too, to where if you do need to be HIPAA compliant, if you do want to get us become SOC 2 compliant, we can put together a product based on your business, some information about your business, and do it in that way as well.
Awesome. I think Dan had a good question here. So, in a small team, you might have people subscribing to different LLMs or products. So bringing them into one, knowing if you've got individuals on their own subscriptions, how do you migrate the whole team and get everybody pointed in the right direction?
That kind of goes back to policy, right? And informing everybody, communicating everybody to know, like, essentially, that could go in your acceptable use policy. The do's and don'ts when you're working with this organization, and a lot of times we put in there the software and stuff that you're able to purchase and what you can, and essentially it has to go through an approval process. I'm really glad you brought this up because in IBM's 2025 cost of the data breach report that just came out at the beginning of the year, it was really heavily focused on AI, and shadow AI was the biggest concern concern in terms of AI and breaches in organizations because people were bringing on tools and stuff that no one had any idea about, and essentially they were causing breaches. So you really want to watch out for that, and again, communicate if any software is to be purchased or used that it needs to go through procurement. And one more thing I want to talk about, which is very timely, is I mentioned a little bit about Anthropic, and they didn't they lost the contract or gave it up with the DoD because of the whole surveillance thing. A few weeks later, OpenAI jumps in to say, "Hey, we have no problem doing it," and now they have the contract with the DoD. A lot of customers, including myself, did remove themselves from the platforms. But I did reach out to my clients and I said, "Hey, this is something we want to think about in the conversation now because." If you are using some of these LLMs that are frowned upon for some of the things they're doing, how are we going to have these conversations with your customers now? Because this comes up a lot. If you're bolting AI features onto your solution, I'm already seeing a lot about when it comes to deals. Do you have governance in place? Do you have an AI model card? And now I can see this question popping up because we're already concerned about privacy and data, and if you're using OpenAI, this is going to be a huge concern about the whole surveillance thing. So this
Hmm.
is very timely, and glad you asked that question.
Very interesting. Awesome. Well, this has been great and informative. And thanks everyone for the Q&A. That's an important part of Midday Connect. So, Larry, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, and everybody. Thank you. And like I said, I'll provide you the guide that you can send to everybody, Spencer.
Great. Wonderful. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back here at the same time next Tuesday, every Tuesday.
Thank
We'll see
you.
you. Thank you.